The idea that any physical demonstration comes from the dead is to me totally absurd. The dead, as we call them, are just like the living. Some leave our sight very ignorant, and others enlightened on all sciences. As the science of life is the only one that has agitated the living, its progression is shown by the development of certain phenomena, as in all other sciences. The fact that development goes on does not prove that the dead know anything about it, but the superstition of the living attributes all of such to the dead. This is because they want to believe what they cannot understand. Now what cannot be understood and yet is admitted is to the wise a stumbling block, and to the conceited and ignorant foolishness. But to the scientific it is a phenomenon to be accounted for in some law or wisdom not yet understood. I have devoted my life to the development of all phenomena seemingly mysterious, and having a good share of the evil common to all men, I found it hard to divest myself of my old belief. Therefore, I have charity for others in the depths of their superstitions. My education never carried me into classical lore, so I have never penetrated the early ages of superstition, nor learned the ancient mythology. Yet what has come to us through tradition and learning has bowed down the human race with a yoke of untold power, so that man now reels and totters with burdens, as though they were the works of the everlasting God, when really they are the works of superstition. All spiritual phenomena have been investigated by the learned, whose prejudices are based on heathen mythology, admitting phenomena that they could not explain, so people have been deceived. Now, after a silence of 200 years, this same old error that played the Salem witchcraft game makes its appearance, asking to be heard as touching the dead. The mediums set themselves up as oracles to call up a spirit of the dead. Tests are given satisfactorily, for the skeptic's brain becomes the machine of his new superstition, and they all become believers. What is death? It is a belief. For if it is a fact, there can be no evidence of its coming to life. A person is alive or he is dead. He can't be both, although we hear of the living telling how they died and what they went through. Now if a person can tell all it is said they can, it is proof that they are not dead. Now first settle what a man is of himself after he is dead. According to the spiritualist mode of reasoning, he cannot be a spirit, for they say he is the same person, wears the same clothes, and is flesh and blood. Now Jesus says flesh and blood cannot enter heaven, so accordingly these spirits, as they are called, cannot be flesh and blood. If they are, they cannot be spirits, for the same author says spirits have not flesh and bones. Jesus would not allow that he was a spirit, but that he had flesh and bones, as he had before he was crucified. So he either told a falsehood, or his dead body rose. And if that rose, he did give people to believe a lie. For he said, as touching the dead, God is not the God of the dead, but the living. He also said, they that rise from the dead, not that they rise, etc. Now all this seems like a contradiction. So it is if you take the Christian's explanation. But if you will take Jesus' explanation, it is clear, for he never had any idea of death, as the Christians say he had. His ideas were at variance with all the world. He never taught any other world, as was believed by the religious Jews. He made man up of ideas. To make a man like Jesus' ideas, you must take a child. The child, according to his ideas, was a blank, so the child's existence was not dependent on itself, nor a belief, nor an opinion. It was a living fact, a child with an identity, susceptible of progression. Now, as the child's growth of body depended on food, so the growth of its intelligence depended on wisdom or opinions. As the child began to learn, its identity became attached to its knowledge. Now its knowledge embraced flesh and blood and memory and all the senses and everything it learned. Now to lose its memory of what it was would be to destroy its life, for its life was a part of itself. But its wisdom can create all that it knows. Knowledge is a created element, but wisdom is infinite and eternal. It is God. And every person is a God just as far as he is wisdom. To know this is life, for this wisdom will teach man that wisdom is from everlasting to everlasting. Here is the trouble. The knowledge of man is finite and must be forgotten and destroyed. But wisdom, not being matter, cannot be destroyed. Now man is a living principle of God, like mathematics. Mathematics is wisdom reduced to practice. The effects of mathematics must be destroyed while the wisdom remains. For instance, take a steam engine. All the principles must exist when the engine is torn to pieces. Now man reasons as though the engine were the living principle, and when that is destroyed, the principle or identity of mathematics is dead. But if we stop to think, we shall see the folly of this. Now every machine and every mathematical calculation that has ever been reduced to practice existed before it was formed. Now the wisdom was as separate from each other as the results are. For instance, see the art of printing all over the world. See the amount or identities or wisdom acting upon matter, each having its own identity of wisdom as well as of matter. See the varieties of all sorts of wisdom. Now suppose that every printing office in the natural world should be destroyed at one blow. Is there any life of printing in existence? The ignorant would say all is dead, but every identity of the printing world would know that this is not so. Each has its own identity. So with man. His body is a machine shop, or scientific world, carried on by the wisdom of God in the identity of man. Each identity claims its own self. The matter is the fruits of its development. If it does not develop itself, it does not make itself any the less out of existence, but it is like the idiot. It is behind the times. It exists, it must exist, and the destruction of the matter does not destroy the principle, called man. Now to me, I know I live in the principle, and the principle is like all other principles, capable of progression. And as I believe in that, I know that the natural man is ignorant of himself, as the child is of any science. Science, to the natural man, has no identity of wisdom. It does not embrace the properties of thought and reason. Yet everyone knows that everything that has form must have its first start in the first cause. Now just raise yourself from the earthly man and wander on the globe and look around and see if you are not, with all your faculties, having an identity of your own, leaving the spot, but not your identity. This is to the world death, but to wisdom, science and progression. Now what proof is there of what I have said, if proof was wanted to establish the foregoing? Volumes could be written to establish this one fact, that a person sitting in his chair or lying on the bed in a state of unconsciousness to the natural world can be at a distance conversing with persons explaining what was going on. Now the objection is that the person is alive, for he comes back. If the body is destroyed, then there is no evidence that what I say is true. This false mode of reasoning arises from our ignorance of what man is. When we find that man, like his God, cannot be seen by the natural eye, but is like a principle put in practice, then we shall see just how learned or wise we are. What we see has as much to do with the man as the engine of a steamboat lying at a wharf in Portland with the intelligence of the maker in New York. How many people ever saw Franklin, the father of electricity? Yet he exists as much as he did 100 years ago. Franklin is the name of that wisdom reduced to practice through a medium of flesh and blood and a body of galvanic batteries. His wisdom was as much in his experiments as in his body, and more so, for his body was not the machine to exhibit his wisdom. So he had to create new bodies to illustrate his truth. Now to suppose this truth existed in his batteries, or body, is to deny the existence of any wisdom outside of man. Why should there be such a difference of opinion in regard to the dead? If there is such a thing as death, what is it? It is of the body, I suppose. Now if the body is matter, has matter life? If it has, then the life is a part of the body, and if the body dies, then the life dies also, for the life is the body. Now if you mean that this is the end of man, what lives after the life and the body die? You will say the soul. Where is the soul? Has anyone ever seen it? Or is it an opinion? The fact is that the theory of the body and soul is not in keeping with the progress of truth or science. It leaves everything in the dark. It gives no proof of any phenomenon, but assumes that man must take an opinion of someone who does not undertake to prove it, and admit an opinion of something that took place 5,000 years ago and renewed 1,800 years ago. Mankind is just the same as it always was, and so is the brute creation and all of God's race. They can be classified from the vegetable world to the spiritual world, but not as they have been, for there never has been a single philosophical grade above the brute since Christ. Jesus tried to establish the kingdom of truth in man, so that men would teach it, but he failed, not because he was ignorant himself, but because man was not developed enough to receive it. It is sometimes supposed that the wisdom of God, or science, is manifest in some simple girl or man. This is the case, and phenomena are continually occurring which baffle the world's wisdom to explain. So they are set down as humbug or deception. By a mesmerized subject, I can prove that there is no such thing as death, as it is understood by all Christians. All will admit that a person can be mesmerized, and when in that state, can read and travel, going off to distant places. I can prove that mind is matter, and there is no matter without mind, and death is nothing but an opinion or state of mind, made up of matter, which can be destroyed like any other opinion. It is true to the soul that is in matter, but to the science that is out of matter, it is only an idea. The word matter is applied to man in his lowest state, just a little above the brute. The brute has his soul, but he is always in matter, for he shows no knowledge over any other brute. He shows no power of teaching more than the brute before him. This proves his limits. The fowls are the same, and all creation have as yet shown no science. Now if it was intended for the above classes to learn and teach science, it is natural to suppose that they would have shown some symptoms of it before now. So I leave them as they are and pass on to man. It is not to be supposed that every man who walks upright is to be set down as a scientific man, nor is it true that everyone who calls himself scientific is so. But it is he who can show himself so to the world by his acts, who can explain some truth, thereby putting the world in possession of a fact that it has been ignorant of, thus increasing the wisdom and happiness of mankind. This is the case with science. Now if death can be explained away so that man can be put in possession of life eternal, then the world will be put in possession of a fact it is now ignorant of. This I will try to do. What is life? It is admitted that it is something. It is a consciousness of an existence, and death is the fear of the annihilation of that consciousness. The natural man never sees anything beyond the idea of his belief. Therefore, he lives in death, and is all his life subject to his own belief. Now convince man that there is something independent of this belief that is true, that there is no such thing as matter, only as it is spoken into existence, and he will then see that mind is the very matter or error that is his belief. As his belief changes, the matter or opinion changes, and as matter or opinion or mind is all the same, when a chemical change takes place, the mind or opinion is destroyed, and truth or science takes the place of error. Then the soul or science stands out from the mind or matter and sees how the mind can be made the medium of any soul to bring about any belief or disease. When man arrives at that, then death is swallowed up in science. Then the world will rejoice in the science that teaches man that he is nothing but a mass of ideas, can be destroyed and molded to any belief, and take a form to suit its author. The knowledge of this teaches us that all misery is in ourselves, arising from some idea that our soul or science is in, like a prison. The world is the belief. The destruction of the prison is the destruction of our belief, and the liberation of our soul from bondage is life eternal. This is in God, or science. Our belief makes ideas out of our identity of a body. Our bodies are nothing but an idea of matter that is under the control of error or false knowledge, and happiness or misery is the wages of our investigation. If truth or science reigns, all goes well. If error reigns, the wages is death, for all the acts of error lead to death. Death is an idea or matter, and all the acts of science destroy death and lead to life and happiness.